Foundations of Fortune. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the small apartment in Gulshan-e-Iqbal, illuminating Zainab's focused expression as she reviewed the business proposals spread across their dining table. Red pen in hand, she meticulously corrected figures and refined language while her husband Tariq paced nervously behind her. "Do you think anyone will actually invest?" Tariq asked, adjusting his only presentable tie for the fifth time. At 32, he carried the determined eyes of a dreamer, but his shoulders slumped with the weight of 3 previous failed ventures. Zainab looked up, her intelligent eyes softening. "They will if you present it exactly as we practiced. The textile market has potential and your production model is innovative." She stood, straightening his collar with the steady hands of a woman who had spent years grading papers as a university economics lecturer. "I wouldn't even have these meetings without your university connections," Tariq admitted, gratitude briefly eclipsing his. "Anxiety. That's what partnership means?" she replied simply. What Zainab didn't mention was the letter tucked in her drawer, an offer to pursue her doctoral studies at Oxford, deferred yet again to support Tariq's dreams. Their shared vision had always been that once his business stabilized, she would resume her academic pursuits. It was a sacrifice she made willingly, believing in their future together. 3 days later, when the initial investors declined, it was Zainab who suggested approaching her uncle Farid, who had recently sold his property in Defense Housing Authority. "It's risky," she acknowledged, "but I believe in your vision." Uncle Farid had left Zainab a modest inheritance when he passed the previous year, money she had planned to use for her studies. Instead, she convinced her family to invest in Tariq's textile company, personally guaranteeing the loan with her family's trust. "This is everything we have," she told Tariq as they signed the papers. "But we'll build something magnificent together." Those early years were beautiful in their struggle. Their small manufacturing unit operated on thin margins, with Zainab managing the books after her teaching hours. When orders came in late at night, she worked alongside the staff, learning every aspect of the textile business. Her economics background proved invaluable as she developed efficient systems that competitors couldn't match. When Tariq froze, during their first major presentation to Karachi's largest department store chain, it was Zainab who seamlessly stepped forward, explaining their unique dyeing techniques and quality controls with such eloquence that they secured the contract that would change everything. "You're the backbone of this operation," Tariq had whispered that night as they celebrated with modest cups of chai on their balcony. "I promise when we're successful, the world will know what you've done for us." 5 years passed in a blur of expansion. Rahman Textiles grew from a single workshop to 3 manufacturing facilities. Their home moved from the modest apartment to a spacious house in Clifton. Tariq's confidence grew with each successful season, his boyish uncertainty replaced with the polished demeanor of a rising business magnate. Zainab watched this transformation with mixed emotions. She delighted in his success but noticed subtle shifts in his character. The man who once consulted her on every decision now returned home with contracts already signed. The husband who had valued her intellect now seemed more impressed by the social graces of the elite businesswomen they encountered. "Perhaps it's time to consider your studies now," she suggested one evening, 6 years into their venture. "The business is stable." "You always said, 'How could I manage without you?'" Tariq interrupted, kissing her forehead. "The company needs you. I need you." The words were right, but something in his tone had changed. It was less a recognition of her value and more a dismissal of her dreams. Still, Zainab nodded, telling herself that partnerships required sacrifice. What she didn't realize was that, with each passing month, Tariq was rewriting the story of their success in his mind. In his rising narrative, his brilliance alone had built Raymond Textiles. Zainab's contributions became footnotes, then whispers, then silence. By their 7th anniversary, Tariq Rahman was known across Pakistan as a self-made success. Only Zainab knew the truth, and soon, that truth would shatter everything they had built. Gilded Cages. The crystal chandelier in the Raymond Mansion's grand foyer caught the late afternoon sun, scattering rainbow prisms across imported marble floors. Zainab paused beneath it, momentarily mesmerized by the light display before the harsh voice of Tariq's new personal assistant interrupted her reverie. "Mr. Raymond is expecting the event planner at 4, and he's requested you not interfere with the arrangements this time," stated Nadia Qureshi, a sleek woman in her 30s, with the polished efficiency of someone who had learned to navigate corporate Pakistan by becoming indispensable to powerful men. "This is still my home, Nadia," Zainab replied quietly, "and the charity gala will bear our family name." Nadia's perfectly outlined lips curved into what resembled a smile, but carried no warmth. "Of course, Mrs. Raymond, I'm simply relaying instructions. Mr. Raymond and Ms. Imran have specific plans for impressing the international investors." The mention of Rabia Imran sent a familiar tightness through Zainab's chest. Over the past 18 months, the ambitious marketing executive had become Tariq's constant shadow, her influence extending from company decisions to their social calendar. At 42, Rabia possessed everything Zainab supposedly lacked: connections to Karachi's elite families, a cosmopolitan education from London, and a wardrobe that graced society pages. "I see," Zainab said, continuing toward her study, the one space in the sprawling mansion that still felt truly hers. There, surrounded by economics journals and the business plans she'd crafted in their early years, she sometimes allowed herself to wonder how different life might have been had she pursued her own dreams. The transformation had been gradual but relentless. As Raymond Textiles expanded internationally, Tariq's ambitions grew proportionally. What began as occasional late meetings with Rabia evolved into overseas trips and private dinners to court investors. Zainab wasn't naive. She recognized the admiration in Tariq's eyes when he spoke of Rabia's business acumen, her social connections, her understanding of the world he now inhabited. "You should see how Rabia handles these international executives," he'd comment after returning from Dubai or Singapore. "They respect her immediately. It's a language of power you've never had to learn." The implication stung more than any direct criticism. In Tariq's reimagining of their life story, Zainab had become an artifact of his humbler beginnings, a simple teacher who couldn't possibly navigate the sophisticated world he now commanded. That evening, Tariq returned home with Rabia beside him, both laughing as they entered the living room where Zainab was reviewing charity proposals. "We've secured the Al-Bakri investment," Tariq announced, loosening his tie with the satisfied air of a conquering general. Rabia's presentation was flawless. "Congratulations," Zainab offered, noticing how Rabia's hand lingered on Tariq's arm. "That's the manufacturing expansion in Bangladesh?" "Among other things," Rabia interjected smoothly. "We've restructured the proposal to include a luxury line that will position Raymond Textiles in completely new markets." She turned to Tariq with conspiratorial familiarity. "Your wife's traditional sensibilities have built a solid foundation, but the future requires broader vision." The condescension was expertly delivered, wrapped in such polite phrasing that objecting would make Zainab appear petty. She watched Tariq nod approvingly at Rabia's assessment, seemingly oblivious to the subtle denigration of his wife's contributions. "The expansion plans are on my desk," Zainab noted. "I had concerns about the financial projections." "We've completely overhauled those," Tariq interrupted dismissively. "The original numbers were too conservative. Rabia's team has prepared new forecasts aligned with our global ambitions." The hour stung, not merely for its romantic implications, but for how completely Tariq had erased their partnership. The business decisions once made over late-night tea at their small kitchen table were now finalized in boardrooms where Zainab was increasingly unwelcome. As the charity gala approached, Zainab found herself systematically excluded from preparations for an event ostensibly hosted by both Raymonds. When she selected a beautiful traditional outfit from a local designer, Tariq frowned. "Wouldn't you prefer something more contemporary?" he suggested. Rabia recommended her personal stylist. "The international press will be covering this event." "Is my appearance suddenly a business concern?" Zainab asked, unable to completely mask her hurt. Tariq's expression softened momentarily, a glimpse of the man she had married. I just want you to feel confident among all these important people. You've been so isolated with your charity work, while the business has moved in new directions. The rare moment of connection disappeared as his phone chimed with Rabia's special ringtone. He answered immediately, turning away as he spoke in the intimate shorthand they had developed. Zainab stood forgotten in her own bedroom, holding the elegant outfit she had selected, suddenly feeling like a stranger in her life. What Tariq didn't know was that Zainab's isolation had been productive. While managing the charitable foundation that bore their name, she had meticulously documented the company's evolution, partly from habit, partly from the growing sense that someone should remember the truth. In a secure digital vault in a safety deposit box across town rested the original business plans in her handwriting, the investment contracts with her family's money, and the correspondence proving her instrumental role in securing their first major contracts. She had collected these records, not as ammunition but as testament. Physical proof that her contributions had mattered, even as Tariq systematically erased them from his narrative. She never imagined she would need these documents until the night before the gala, when she overheard Tariq and Rabia in his study. After tomorrow's announcement, "We'll begin the corporate restructuring," Rabia was saying. "The board already supports the leadership transition. Zainab's foundation can continue as a separate entity, of course, but we need to distance the core business from her. Provincial approach." "She'll understand eventually," Tariq replied, his voice carrying the false confidence of a man justifying betrayal. "She's always said she wanted to focus on her charitable interests. This gives her that freedom." Standing outside the study door, Zainab felt a strange calm descend. After years of gradual erasure, they were planning the final act, removing her from the company she had helped build from nothing. As she walked silently back to her room, she made a decision that would change everything. The public Fall the Raymond Charity Gala transformed the Grand Pearl Hotel's ballroom into a shimmering wonderland of silver and blue. 500 of Pakistan's wealthiest and most influential citizens mingled beneath custom chandeliers, while international investors and press circulated among them. Photographers captured every handshake and smile, particularly those of Tariq Rahman, whose textbook rags to riches story had made him a darling of business media. Zainab arrived separately from her husband, who had left hours earlier with Rabia to oversee final arrangements. She wore not the traditional outfit she had initially selected, nor anything from the collection of Western designer clothes Tariq had recently purchased for her. Instead, she chose a simple but elegant shalwar kameez in deep emerald, reminiscent of what she had worn during the early years of their marriage when they had worked side by side to build their dream. Around her neck hung her mother's modest pendant, a stark contrast to the diamonds and designer labels adorning other attendees. In her handbag rested a small USB drive and several printed documents, their weight seemingly insignificant compared to the burden they represented. As she entered, Zainab noticed how conversations momentarily faltered, then resumed with greater animation. She caught fragments: separate arrivals, trouble in paradise, the simple wife, before they dissolved into polite smiles as she passed. Near the stage, Tariq stood with Rabia and a cluster of international executives, both of them laughing with the easy confidence of people accustomed to commanding rooms. "Ah, here she is," Tariq announced as he spotted Zainab, his tone carrying the slightly exaggerated warmth reserved for public performances. "My better half, though certainly not my business half these days." The executives laughed obligingly as Tariq extended his arm to draw her into the circle. His smile faltered slightly at her attire, his eyes darting to Rabia, who made no attempt to hide her disapproval. "I was just telling the Al-Bakri team about our expansion," Tariq continued smoothly. "Rabia has been instrumental in developing our luxury markets. Her vision aligns perfectly with where we need to take the company." "Indeed," added Hamad Al-Bakri, a distinguished Emirati investor. Ms. Imran's presentation was most impressive. "The modern direction for Raymond Textiles shows remarkable foresight." Zainab smiled politely. "The company has certainly evolved from its humble beginnings." I'd be interested to hear more about these new directions. Something in her tone caused Tariq to tighten his grip on her arm imperceptibly. Zainab focuses primarily on our charitable foundation now, he explained quickly. The technical aspects of international business can be quite complex for those without the background. The condescension hung in the air, made worse by Rabia's sympathetic nod. The foundation does important work with traditional artisans, Rabia added, her tone suggesting she was discussing a quaint hobby rather than a significant organization employing hundreds of women. Traditional skills still have their place, Tariq agreed with a patronizing smile, though the real future lies in modernization and scale. My wife prefers the simpler approaches. The executives nodded understandingly, their expressions betraying a mixture of embarrassment and relief that their own spouses weren't present to be similarly diminished. Zainab extracted herself from Tariq's grip with practiced grace, her expression revealing nothing of the resolve crystallizing within her. The evening proceeded according to Tariq's meticulously planned schedule. Dinner was served, awards presented, and donations pledged to the foundation that bore the Rehman name but increasingly reflected none of Zainab's input. As coffee was served, Tariq approached the podium for his keynote address, the moment when he would officially announce the company's international expansion and the organizational restructuring that would effectively remove Zainab from any meaningful role. Distinguished guests, he began, his voice carrying the polished confidence that had become his trademark 15 years ago. I began with nothing but determination and a dream. As Tariq recounted his version of the Rehman Textiles story, a narrative that positioned him as sole visionary and architect of its success, Zainab felt a curious detachment. For years, she had accepted her gradual erasure as the price of their shared success. She had told herself that what mattered was the result, not the recognition. But watching Tariq now, seeing Rabia's triumphant expression as she waited near the stage for her moment to be introduced as the company's new chief strategy officer, Zainab understood that truth itself was at stake. Not just her truth, but the truth of every person whose contributions had been systematically minimized or forgotten. And now, Tariq continued, approaching his conclusion, I'm proud to announce that Rehman Textiles will be expanding into European luxury markets under bold new leadership. But first, I'd like to acknowledge my wife, Zainab. The spotlight swung to find her at her table. Tariq's expression carried the benevolent condescension of a man bestowing an unexpected gift. While her traditional approach served us well in the early days, he continued, Zainab has graciously agreed to step back from business operations to focus exclusively on the charitable foundation. Her simple values and connection to our humble roots provide an important counterbalance to our global ambitions. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Many eyes turned to Zainab, expecting embarrassment or quiet acceptance. Instead, they found her rising with calm dignity. Thank you for the acknowledgement, Tariq, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly hushed room. After 15 years, recognition is indeed overdue. Tariq's smile faltered slightly as she approached the stage. This wasn't in the program. Rabia took a half step forward as if to intercept her, then hesitated as camera flashes began to multiply. Since we're discussing Rehman Textiles' origins tonight, Zainab continued, accepting the microphone from a confused stage manager, perhaps it's time for the complete story to be told. Empires unraveled. The ballroom's atmosphere transformed from polite attention to electric tension as Zainab stood beside Tariq on stage, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to his growing discomfort. 500 of Pakistan's elite shifted in, their seats sensing the unfolding of something unprecedented. Journalists who had been half listening to predictable corporate announcements suddenly found themselves witnessing what might become tomorrow's headline. The story of Rehman Textiles is indeed remarkable, Zainab began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. But like many stories, the narrative changes depending on who tells it. Tariq leaned toward her, his smile frozen but his whisper urgent. This isn't the time, Zainab. We can discuss your concerns privately. She continued as if he hadn't spoken. 15 years ago, when we had nothing but determination and dreams, as my husband correctly stated, the foundation of what would become Raymond Textiles came from my family's investment. From her handbag, she withdrew several documents, handing copies to a nearby journalist. The initial capital came from my inheritance, money originally intended for my doctoral studies at Oxford University, which I deferred to support our shared vision. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Tariq's expression hardened as he recognized the original investment contract bearing his signature and acknowledging the source of funds. The first manufacturing contracts, Zainab continued, were secured through my university connections and presented in my economic framework. She produced another document. This first proposal for Jinnah department stores is in my handwriting, with my financial projections that we exceeded by 12% in the first year. The whispers grew louder. Several investors leaned forward, their interest shifting from polite obligation to intense focus. Rabia stood frozen near the stage steps, her triumphant smile replaced by calculating assessment. I don't share these truths to diminish my husband's contributions, Zainab clarified, her gaze sweeping the room. Tariq's vision and determination were essential to our success. But partnership, true partnership, requires honest acknowledgement of all contributions. She turned to face Tariq directly. When you spoke of organizational restructuring, of removing me from the company we built together without consultation or compensation, you broke not just our personal covenant, but our business one. Gasps punctuated the silence. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances, confirming to the watching journalists that Zainab's allegations weren't merely marital grievances, but potentially significant corporate governance issues. Mrs. Brehman, interrupted Fawad Mirza, chairman of the board, rising from his seat. These are serious allegations that should be addressed in appropriate forums, not at a charity event. I agree completely, Zainab replied, which is why I've submitted comprehensive documentation to the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the proposed restructuring, highlighting potential violations of shareholder agreements and fiduciary duties. The calculated mention of the SEC sent visible shockwaves through the corporate attendees. What had begun as uncomfortable marital drama had escalated to potential regulatory investigation. Investors reached for their phones, while journalists frantically took notes. Furthermore, Zainab continued with the same measured calm, as 30% shareholder through my family's initial investment, a stake never legally diminished despite being systematically excluded from decision-making, I am exercising my right to call for an emergency board meeting to address these governance concerns. Tariq stepped forward, attempting to reclaim control. My wife is understandably emotional about corporate changes that would allow her to focus on her charitable interests. These misunderstandings are documented in meeting minutes, emails, and recorded conversations, Zainab finished, producing the USB drive, including yesterday's strategy discussion with Ms. Imran regarding removing me from the company regardless of her objections. The mention of recordings caused Rabia to physically recoil. Several executives who had been part of those discussions suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, Tariq tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. I apologize for this unexpected domestic disagreement. Perhaps we should proceed with the remainder of our program while your international investors reconsider their commitments? Hamad al-Bakri interjected, rising from his seat. Mr. Raymond, our investment was predicated on transparent governance and ethical leadership. These allegations require immediate clarification. Within moments, what had been a choreographed corporate celebration devolved into barely controlled chaos. Investors huddled in corners with legal advisors who had accompanied them. Journalists formed a ring around Zainab, who answered their questions with the same composed precision that had characterized her financial analyses years ago. Across the room, Tariq found himself increasingly isolated as business associates subtly distanced themselves, their instinct for self-preservation overriding years of carefully cultivated relationships. Rabia, ever the strategist, had already disappeared, presumably to contact her own legal counsel. By midnight, three things had become clear. The Al-Bakri investment was on hold pending further investigation. The board would indeed meet in emergency session the following morning, and the story of the Raymond Textiles empire had forever changed in the public consciousness. As dawn broke over Karachi, business news channels ran continuous coverage of what they termed the Raymond revelation. Financial analysts dissected the potential impact on the company's stock, while social commentators debated the broader implications for women in Pakistan's corporate culture. In the Rahman mansion, Zainab methodically packed essential belongings. The household staff moved around her with quiet deference, their expressions conveying what words could not, respect for a strength they had always recognized, but now witnessed others acknowledging as well. When Tariq finally returned home, he found her in their bedroom, closing a suitcase. "Was public humiliation necessary?" he demanded, his voice hoarse from hours of emergency meetings and damage control. 15 years of marriage, and you choose to destroy everything in a single night." Zainab regarded him steadily. "I didn't destroy anything, Tariq. I simply spoke the truth you've been rewriting for years." She closed the suitcase with quiet finality. "The company will survive if you start making decisions based on facts rather than the fiction you've created. The board has suspended me pending investigation," he said bitterly. "Investors are withdrawing. Everything I've built, everything we built," she corrected gently. "That distinction matters, not just for us, but for the hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depend on this company surviving its founder's ego." As she moved toward the door, Tariq's anger crumbled into something more vulnerable. "Where will you go?" "To my sister's, temporarily." She paused at the threshold. "The board has asked me to submit a restructuring proposal that would stabilize the company. Unlike the plan you developed with Rabia, mine will acknowledge every contributor fairly, including you." "And us?" he asked, the question encompassing far more than their marriage. Zainab's expression held neither triumph nor bitterness, only a calm certainty that had been years in the making. "Some foundations, once broken, cannot be rebuilt in the same form," she answered. "But perhaps something different can emerge from the truth. That will depend on whether you're finally ready to see me as I am, rather than as you needed me to be." With that, she departed, leaving Tariq alone in the mansion that suddenly felt more museum than home, a monument to a version of history that no longer existed. Rebirth from ashes. The converted warehouse in Karachi's old industrial district hummed with purposeful activity. Looms clacked rhythmically as women of various ages worked with focused precision, transforming raw threads into textiles of extraordinary beauty. Natural light poured through skylights onto workstations where traditional techniques merged with innovative designs, creating fabrics that honored cultural heritage while meeting international quality standards. At the center of this organized creativity stood Zainab Rahman, 18 months removed from the night that had changed everything. Her simple elegance remained unchanged, though observers noted a new confidence in her bearing, the natural authority of a woman who had reclaimed her narrative. The Japanese buyers were particularly impressed with the sustainable dyeing process, reported Farial Jabbar, Zainab's operations director and longtime friend from her teaching days. "They've increased their order by 30% for next season." "Excellent," Zainab nodded, reviewing the contracts. "Let's make sure the artisan collectives in Sindh and Balochistan receive the corresponding increase in their commissions. Their traditional knowledge makes these processes possible." This was Naqsh Collective, born from the ashes of what many expected to be a protracted corporate and legal battle. Instead, in the weeks following the gala revelation, Zainab had proposed an unexpected solution, dividing Rahman Textiles into two distinct entities. The Industrial Manufacturing Division would retain the Raymond name under restructured leadership, while the luxury handcrafted textiles and sustainability initiatives would form a new company under her direction. The business press had initially portrayed it as a divorce settlement writ large, but industry insiders recognized the strategic brilliance. Both companies emerged stronger through specialization, while hundreds of jobs were preserved in the transition. "The Financial Times reporter is here for your interview," Farial mentioned, gesturing toward the conference room where a woman waited with a photographer. "They're featuring Naksh in their Women Transforming Business special issue." Zainab straightened her simple linen jacket. "Remind me to highlight the master artisan's contribution. This recognition belongs to all of us." The interview proceeded smoothly until the inevitable questions about Tariq and the infamous gala night arose. "Many expected you to pursue punitive measures against your former husband," the journalist noted. "Instead, you proposed a solution that preserved the original company. Some critics suggest you compromised too much." Zainab considered her response carefully. "Destruction is easy. Creation is harder but ultimately more satisfying. The goal was never to tear down what we had built together, but to ensure truth and fairness prevailed. And personally, you divorced shortly after the company division was finalized. Some relationships, like some business models, reach natural conclusions," Zainab replied with the same composed dignity that had characterized her throughout the ordeal. "Tariq and I built something meaningful together. That history doesn't disappear, even as we move in different directions. What she didn't share was the memory of their final conversation as legal partners, the moment in her lawyer's office when the documents were signed, and Tariq had finally looked at her without the distorting lens of his ambition. "I rewrote our story because the truth was too humbling," he had admitted, his voice stripped of the polished confidence that had become his trademark. "Acknowledging your contribution meant facing my own inadequacies. The tragedy," she had replied gently, "is that I never needed you to be anything other than my partner. Your drive and vision were always enough. The embellishments were unnecessary." That conversation had provided closure, if not reconciliation. Some wounds healed but left permanent changes to the landscape. After the interview concluded, Zainab walked through the production floor, stopping to discuss techniques with master weavers and check on apprentices from the educational program she had established. This was her legacy taking shape, not merely a successful business, but a model for combining traditional craftsmanship with contemporary business practices. As afternoon shadows lengthened, her assistant approached hesitantly. "Mr. Raymond is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Zainab's surprise barely registered before her practical nature took over. "Show him to my office. And bring tea, please." Tariq entered with uncharacteristic hesitation. The past year had altered him visibly. The designer suits replaced by more modest attire, the carefully manicured appearance giving way to something more authentic, if less polished. Most striking was his expression, the arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. "Your success is well-deserved," he began, accepting the offered seat. "The Naksh designs are appearing in international fashion houses. The sustainability practices you've implemented are being cited as industry benchmarks." "Thank you," she acknowledged simply. "The restructured Raymond Textiles seems to be stabilizing as well. The quarterly reports show improvement." "After significant effort," he admitted ruefully, "rebuilding investor confidence has been educational." The careful conversation continued, addressing business developments and mutual acquaintances. Beneath the professional courtesy lay currents of unresolved emotions, not the passionate drama of their separation, but something more complex. Two people who had known each other intimately, navigating the unfamiliar territory of their new relationship. Finally, Tariq reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small package wrapped in handmade paper. "I came across this while archiving old company records," he explained, sliding it across the desk. "I thought you should have it." Unwrapping the package, Zainab found a framed photograph she had forgotten existed, the two of them standing proudly before their first textile workshop 15 years earlier. Her handwritten business plan was visible on the table beside them, both their expressions alight with shared possibility. "You were right," Tariq said quietly. "About everything. Not just the business, but what happens when we deny the truth of our own story." Zainab studied the photograph. Memories flooding back of that early partnership, the late nights planning, the shared anxiety over cash flow, the celebration of their first major sale. "We were good together then," she observed without regret, "before success became more important than substance." "I've been meeting with a counselor," Tariq offered unexpectedly, "trying to understand why recognition and status became so consuming that I would betray the one person who believed in me from the beginning." She nodded, acknowledging the significance of this admission from a man who had once dismissed therapy as weakness. "I'm not here asking for reconciliation," he clarified, perhaps reading hope in her expression. "Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone who would have deserved your partnership." The statement hung between them. Not quite an apology, not merely closure, but something approaching growth. "That journey is worthwhile regardless of its destination," Zainab replied after a thoughtful pause. "I'm finding my own way forward as well." As afternoon shifted toward evening, they shared tea and careful conversation. The bitterness of betrayal had mellowed into something more nuanced, two people acknowledging the complex truth of their shared history while accepting the separate paths that now stretched before them. When Tariq finally rose to leave, he gestured toward the vibrant workshop visible through the office windows. "You've created something remarkable here, something true to who you've always been." "We all build according to our own blueprints eventually," she answered. "Some just discover theirs later than others." After he departed, Zainab remained at her desk, the photograph before her illuminated by the setting sun. She traced her finger along the edge of the simple frame, acknowledging the pain and growth of the journey from that moment to this one. Then she placed the photograph on a shelf among other mementos, not hidden away, but not centrally displayed either. Just one chapter in a continuing story whose most important pages, she suspected, were still being written. Outside, the artisans continued their work as twilight gathered, creating beauty through the ancient marriage of skill and patience. In this, Zainab found her most profound lesson. The most enduring creations, whether textiles or lives, emerged not from hurried ambition, but from authentic vision and the courage to honor one's true design.